This is researcher Aurora. It is October 1940. My research team and I have been contracted by the Russian government to study and experiment with the effects of sleep and sleep deprivation. I shall be documenting this progress on tape. The ultimate goal here is to eradicate the need for sleep for prolonged periods of time, essentially ridding a person of their need to sleep without any suffering or damage or decline in cognitive ability. As I understand it, if successful, this research shall be implemented in the use of cultivating better and more efficient soldiers. Men who do not need to sleep will have advantage over those who do. We have created an experimental gas-based stimulant. It is toxic if inhaled in high concentrations, so as long as oxygen intake is monitored and the amount of gas is regulated, then it will not kill and hopefully keep subjects awake. The government has given us 5 test subjects to experiment with. They are political prisoners that have been deemed enemies of the state. The chamber has been outfitted with microphones and 5-inch thick glass portal-sized windows in order for us to monitor them both visually and auditory. The chamber has also been stocked with books, cots to sleep on without bedding, running water, and a toilet, as well as enough dried food to last all 5 prisoners for well over a month. It has been 5 days since the research has begun. The subjects hardly complain about their captivity after having been falsely promised freedom, as long as they are willing to submit to the tests and do not sleep for 30 days. We've been monitoring their conversations and activities, and as time went on, we noted that they continued to talk about increasingly traumatic incidents in their past. And after the 4-day mark, the general tone of conversation began to take on a much darker aspect. It is not clear yet if this is an important side effect of the gas and the sleep deprivation, or simply the stress of their captivity. Regardless, I'm having conversations within the chamber documented and transcribed for further evaluation. It is now the 7th day of testing, and the subjects have started to complain about the circumstances and events that led them to where they are. They have all begun to demonstrate signs of extreme paranoia. In fact, all subjects have ceased conversation with each other. They no longer talk about anything at all. However, they have alternatively begun whispering into the microphones and at the one-way mirrored portholes. Oddly, they all suffer from the same delusion. They all seem to think that they can win the trust of the experimenters by turning over their comrades, the other subjects in captivity with them. What they are confessing about their peers in hopes to gain favor varies widely. Suggestions from comrades being American spies to even being robots. One even suggested that his fellow subject was actually a Russian spy who was experimenting on us while we experimented on them, and the whole thing was set up by the government without any real intention of developing an anti-sleep agent. The conspiracies grow greater by the hour. I'm continuing to have everything transcribed, and I've recruited a renowned psychologist to come and give his perspective and opinions on the matter. However, when it comes to the behavior of the subjects, my colleagues and I are suspecting that this is an effect brought on by the gas itself. Nine days have now passed since the start of this experiment. On the morning of this day, around 7:30, the first of the captives started screaming. He began running the length of the chamber, repeatedly yelling at the top of his lungs for 3 straight hours, after which he continued attempting to scream but was only able to produce occasional squeaks. We believe this is due to him physically tearing his vocal cords. However, the most surprising thing about this incident is the way that the other captives reacted to it, or rather didn't react to it. They continued whispering into the microphones until the second of the captives started to scream. The two non-screaming captives then took the books apart, smeared page after page with their own feces, and pasted them very calmly over the glass portholes. The screaming then promptly stopped, and so too did the whispering into the microphones. 3 days have passed since my last entry, and there has been no change. We have checked the microphones hourly to make sure they're working, and they are. There appears to be no malfunction whatsoever with our equipment, but it seems impossible that absolutely no sound could be coming from within the chamber when there are 5 people inside. According to the oxygen consumption levels within the chamber, it indicates that all 5 must still be alive. In fact, the amount of oxygen consumed is the amount that 5 people would consume at a very heavy level of strenuous exercise. We have not devised a further course of action as of yet. We will continue to monitor them to the best of our abilities, but honestly, we're a little stumped. And I've noticed a few of my researchers have become rather unsettled. I've ordered mandatory therapy sessions for everyone involved with the experiment. This is researcher Aurora. I am the head researcher of this experiment, contracted to discover a way to eradicate the need for sleep. It is November 1940. It is the evening of the 16th day, almost midnight now. This is going to be my last entry, as after this there will be nothing left to report on. I am going to try and recollect and record all the events that unfolded within the past 2-3 days as best as I can. It's safe to say that none of us expected this. No one could have predicted this outcome, but it was the morning of the 14th day when we decided to do something that we, in the beginning, said that we would not do in order to provoke a reaction from the captives. We used the intercom system inside the chamber, hoping to get any sort of response from the subjects that we still feared might somehow be dead or simply vegetables. We announced that we were going to open the chamber to test the microphones. We ordered them all to step away from the door and lie flat on the floor, or else they would be shot. We also told them that compliance would earn one of them their immediate freedom. To our surprise, we heard one single phrase in a very calm voice respond: "We no longer want to be freed." Debate broke out among my colleagues as well as the military forces funding this research, but we were unable to provoke any more response using the intercom system, and it was finally decided that we would open the chamber at midnight on the 15th day. We flushed the chamber of the stimulant gas and filled it with fresh air, and immediately voices from the microphones began to object. 3 different voices began begging, as if pleading for the life of a loved one, to turn the gas back on. The chamber was then opened, and soldiers were sent in to retrieve the test subjects. The subjects began to scream louder than ever, and so too did some of the soldiers when they saw what was inside that chamber. 4 out of 5 subjects were still alive, although no one could rightly call the state of any of them were in life. The Food rations past day 5 had not been so much as touched. There were chunks of meat from the dead test subject's thighs and chest stuffed into the drain in the center of the chamber, blocking it and allowing about 4 inches of water to accumulate on the floor. However, precisely how much of it was actually water and how much of it was actually blood was not determined. The 4 surviving test subjects also had large portions of muscle and skin torn away from their bodies. The destruction of flesh and exposed bone on the fingertips indicated that all of these wounds were inflicted by hand and not with teeth, as we initially believed. Closer examination of the position and the angles of the wounds would also indicate that most, if not all of them, were self-inflicted. The abdominal organs below the rib cage of all 4 test subjects had been removed, while the heart, lungs, and diaphragm remained in place. The skin and most of the muscles attached to the ribs had been ripped off, exposing the lungs through the rib cage. All the blood vessels and organs remained intact. They had just been taken out and laid on the floor, fanning out around the eviscerated but still living bodies of the subjects. The digestive tract of all 4 could be seen to be working, digesting food, but it quickly became apparent that what they were digesting was their own flesh that they had ripped off and eaten over the course of days. Most of the soldiers at the facility were Russian special operatives, but still many of them refused to return to the chamber to remove the test subjects. The subjects continued to scream to be left in the chamber and begged and demanded that the gas be turned back on lest they fall asleep. To everyone's surprise, including my own, the test subjects put up a fierce fight in the process of being removed from the chamber. One of the soldiers died in the struggle, and another was gravely injured by having an artery in his leg severed by one of the subject's teeth. I was informed this morning that one man committed suicide in his room after the ordeal. I'm considering this and documenting it to be a casualty of the experiment. In the struggle, one of the 4 living subjects ruptured his spleen and bled out immediately. The medical team attempted to sedate him, but this proved impossible. He was injected with more than 10 times the human dose of morphine derivative and still fought like a cornered animal, breaking the arm of one of the doctors. His heart was seen to beat for a full 2 minutes after he had bled out, to the point that there was more air in his vascular system than blood. Even after it stopped beating, he continued to scream and flail for another 3 minutes, struggling to attack anyone in reach and just repeating the word more over and over, weaker and weaker, until he finally fell silent. My colleagues and I have failed to figure out how he was able to remain so animate after his heart stopped beating. We considered the gas, but there is no indication that the gas would be able to cause this anomaly. The 3 surviving test subjects were heavily but carefully restrained and moved to a medical facility. The 2 with intact vocal cords continuously begged for the gas and demanded we keep them awake. The most injured of the 3 was taken to the only surgical operating room that this facility had. His vocal cords were destroyed and he was unable to beg or object to the surgery, and could only react by shaking his head violently in disapproval when the anesthetic gas was brought near him. He shook his head yes when someone suggested, reluctantly, that they try the surgery without anesthetic. He did not react for the entire 6-hour procedure of replacing his abdominal organs and attempting to cover them with what remained of his skin. The presiding surgeon repeatedly stated that it should not be medically possible for the patient to still be alive. One of the terrified nurses assisting the surgery stated that she had seen the patient's mouth curl into a smile several times whenever his eyes met hers. When the surgery ended, the subject looked at the surgeon and began to wheeze loudly, attempting to speak. Assuming it must be something of drastic importance, the surgeon had a pen and pad fetched for the patient so he could write his message. It was simple. Keep cutting. The other two test subjects were given the same surgery, both without anesthetic as well, although they had to be injected with a paralytic for the duration of the operation. The surgeon found it impossible to perform the operation while the patients laughed continuously. Once paralyzed, the subjects could only follow the attending researchers with their eyes. The paralytic cleared their system in an abnormally short period of time, and they were soon trying to escape their bonds. The moment they could speak, they were again asking for the stimulant gas. We tried asking them why they had injured themselves, why they had ripped out their own guts, and why they wanted to be given the gas again. Only one response from both of them was ever given. I must remain awake. After the surgeries, all three subjects' restraints were reinforced and they were placed back into the chamber while we deliberated on what to do with them. We considered euthanizing the surviving subjects, a vote for which I myself was in favor of. But we were facing the wrath of the military benefactors for having failed the stated goals of the project. The commanding officer, an ex-KGB, instead saw potential and wanted to see what would happen if they were put back onto the gas. I strongly objected to this decision, as did most of my colleagues, but we were overruled. In preparation for being sealed back into the chamber again, I ordered the subjects to be connected to an EEG monitor and had their restraints padded for long-term confinement. To everyone's surprise, all three subjects stopped struggling the moment it was let slip that they were going back on the gas. It was obvious at this point that all three of them were putting up a great struggle to just stay awake. One of the subjects that could speak was continuously humming very loudly. The mute subject was straining his legs against leather bonds with all his might for just something to focus on. The third subject kept holding his head off his pillow and blinking rapidly. Having been the first to be wired for the EEG, we monitored his brainwaves with a mixture of fear and fascination and confusion. They were normal most of the time, but occasionally they would inexplicably flatline. It looked as if he were repeatedly suffering brain death before returning to normal. As we were focused on the paper scrolling out of the brainwave monitor, only one nurse saw his eyes slip shut at the same moment his head hit the pillow. His brainwaves immediately changed to that of deep sleep and then flatlined one last time as his heart stopped. The only remaining subject that could speak started screaming to be sealed in immediately. His brain waves showed the same flat lines as the one who had just died from falling asleep. The commander gave the order to seal the chamber with both subjects, as well as myself and 4 of my fellow researchers inside. One of my colleagues drew his gun and shot the commander point blank between the eyes, then turned the gun on the mute subject and shot him in the head as well. I don't know where or when he even got the gun, but then he pointed it at the remaining subjects still restrained to a bed. I ushered the remaining team out of the chamber and told them to flee as I grabbed the commander's gun, worried that soldiers who might have heard the shot would soon be upon us. I should have fled myself, but I couldn't. My colleague screamed at the last remaining subject. He said, "I won't be locked in here with these things. Not with you. What are you?" he demanded. "I must know." The room went cold and unnaturally still and quiet as the subject smiled. "Have you forgotten so easily?" he asked. "We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest animal mind. We are what you hide from in your beds every night. We are what you sedate into silence and paralysis when you go to that nocturnal haven where we cannot tread." My researcher paused, then aimed his gun at the subject's heart and fired. The EEG flatlined as the subject weakly choked out, so nearly free.